Well, my next guest is a Jersey guy and a published author with quite a few baseball books under his name, usually about the Mets and Yankees from the 80s and 90s. I recently finished one of those books, Road to Nowhere, and I could not put it down. His latest work, which came out in May, is Get Your Tokens Ready, highlighting the 2000 Subway Series between the two teams. And we are thrilled to have him on the show today. Chris Donnelly, thanks so much for being here.
Mike, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. So you and I pretty much grew up in the same era with a love for baseball. I still think it's the greatest sport, even though the game kind of keeps changing on us as time goes on. How did you first develop a passion for baseball?
My family actually has sort of a deep baseball background, not in a professional sense, but they've been huge baseball fans, especially on my father's side. They grew up New York Giants fans, refused to root for the Yankees when the Giants left town, became Mets fans. I have some great uncles who played some semi-pro ball. My grandfather actually used Larry Doby as a ringer on one of his local teams in Wayne, New Jersey. So just it's sort of been ingrained in me since I was a young kid.
Now, this is kind of a broad question because there's so many of them from our era, but did you have any favorite players growing up?
My favorite player was Don Mattingly growing up. I started watching the Yankees when they were not that great, and he was really one of the only reasons you would want to watch the team, and has been my favorite player, and I haven't adopted another one since. It's always going to be him.
Fantastic. Now, a lot of great sports authors out there. Are there any that you drew inspiration from?
Yeah, Mike Vaccaro is an excellent writer. If you know him, writes for the New York Post, and he's been very generous to me, and I appreciate that. And he's a great writer. Love his columns. And Jane Levy, I consider probably the best baseball writer out there. And her biography on Sandy Koufax actually served as sort of an inspiration for how I wanted to structure my most recent book, Get Your Tokens Ready. So I'll read anything that she puts out.
Now, what did you realize that you wanted to start writing about the game, and what specifically attracted you to the Mets and the Yankees?
So I'm not a writer. This is sort of a side gig, a hobby, if you will. And I was, like I said, I started watching the Yankees when they were not good. And so the first time they made the playoffs in 1995 was a big deal for me. They played this really memorable series against the Mariners, and they were eliminated in heartbreaking fashion. But I'd always loved this series, and I thought it would make a great book. And I was out to dinner with my then girlfriend, now wife, and just said, this would be a great book. Somebody should write about it. And she said, well, why don't you just write about it? So I did. And that was the first one. And I think one of the sayings is write what you know about, or at least what you think you know about. And so 80s, 90s Mets Yankees baseball is something I know a little bit about. So it's just been my passion to write about that.
It's a great era we grew up in. Any part of 90s baseball that you find most fascinating?
I think a lot of folks are drawn to the championship years of the Yankees, and understandably so. I'm a Yankees fan. I don't try to hide that fact. But for me, it's the non-championship years that I always find more fascinating and more interesting. And so, especially because that's when I started watching. So the early 90s Yankees and Mets teams, there's so much about them that maybe if you're a fan at the time, it's not great. But when you look back now, it's really interesting. And to have the opportunity to talk to a lot of those guys about their experiences and to write about it, it's just something I love doing.
Now, this is kind of another broad question. What's your favorite part about being a sports writer and an author?
It's the idea that these guys that I grew up watching are now talking to me about these experiences. Paul O'Neill wrote the foreword to my second book, How the Yankees Explain New York. And I remember being on the phone with him just talking about the foreword and what he wanted to say and how he was going to frame it. And I just sort of had this moment where it's like, I couldn't believe I'm having this conversation that I'm talking to Paul O'Neill, who I remember when they traded for him. I was 12 years old. And it was kind of a surreal moment. And so to think that I get to have these conversations and then get to write about them, and that people would actually be interested in what I'm writing and would actually want to read about it, it's still cool. It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. Doesn't matter if this is the fifth or the first book. It's still very cool to me.
Now, part of the fun of being a sports anchor, for example, is chasing down big names to interview them. You mentioned Paul O'Neill. Who are some of the other big names you've interviewed for your books?
Well, I got to interview Don Mattingly, which was, I'm happy to say I did not totally fanboy out. I was incredibly professional when that happened. But interviewing him was great. I've spoken to Hall of Famers like Wade Boggs, Edgar Martinez, Phil Negro. I got a chance to speak to Gary Carter before he passed away, Bobby Valentine, Buck Showalter. Just again, Hall of Famers, but also just speaking to other guys who I watched as a kid and maybe aren't big names, but just really I have fond memories of, like Jim Leyritz, right, or even somebody like Jeff Innes, who's a pitcher for the Mets. Even talking to those guys, and they often have better stories, is a thrill.
Now, you've written a lot of books about the same time periods. Do you find that there's a lot of overlap within your books, and does that kind of create a challenge in writing a new book without repeating too much of the same material?
There is some, yeah. The first book was about the 95 Division Series, and so that gets covered in the book that you just finished reading, Road to Nowhere. And I try not to, in Road to Nowhere, I try not to revisit every detail that I put in Baseball's Greatest Series, which is the first book. So you give it a couple of pages, but then you move on. And it does create a challenge sometimes, because I don't want to literally take the same exact words I wrote and put them in the story again. So you have to sort of tackle it from a new angle. It is a challenge. I think and hope I've been able to do it successfully in the places where it's come up.
Now, and you have, certainly. I know you write primarily about baseball. Have you ever written about other sports, or do you have the desire to?
So I'm a huge baseball fan, and baseball is always going to be my favorite sport, and that's probably never going to change. I do love other sports as well. I'm a huge hockey fan, love football. I think, though, just given my love for baseball, it's probably what I'll stick with. If I were to move out of that, it would probably be more towards history and American history, which I have had some thoughts on. I'm not there yet. I do have some more baseball book ideas that I want to pursue first. But I would probably stick with baseball if I'm going to keep writing about sports.
And to piggyback off of that, what is another baseball topic you'd be interested in writing about?
Well, I can't give too much away at the moment. I'm working on another book, and then I have another project in mind that will hopefully pan out in a little while. I will say that the next book will be about a feat that's extremely rare in baseball, but is never celebrated. It's been accomplished maybe a dozen or so times, and it's quite an achievement, but the guys who have done it are not remembered for doing it.
Chris, one curveball question. Don Mattingly, your favorite player, Hall of Famer?
I knew that was coming. I would say yes. If you look at other players who are in the Hall of Fame, I think Mattingly not only measures up to them, but surpasses them in a lot of areas. I think, if I'm just being honest, if the Hall of Fame were what I believe was originally envisioned for it, he probably doesn't make the cut. But everything changes in baseball. Everything changes, and when you look at folks who have made it over the past, and you look at his accomplishments, and he was the best player in baseball for 6 years. Mm-hmm. That's not nothing. Not to mention just his fielding abilities, and so he's up later this year in one of the committees, and I do hope he makes it.
He had a better peak than anyone. Chris Donnelly, baseball author and a New Jersey native, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Mike.